10 Biggest Differences Between Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, Episode 4. For a show that is connected to a franchise that basically popularized the term sexposition, we were wondering when House of the Dragon was going to give us the lowdown on the nasty desires of the nobles of King's Landing. We were more than surprised to find that not only was the sensuality of Episode 4 not overt, it also made much more sense than, say, delivering a monologue in a brothel whilst two of your employees demonstrate their skills to you. And yet, even after indulging in a bit of fan service, King of the Narrow Sea managed to make every scene count towards telling a story, and that story is that Rhaenyra Targaryen is finally learning how to play the Game of Thrones, and she might like the wrong things about the entire thing. But as is the case with every adaptation, the way this is portrayed to us is different from what Archmaester Gildane writes in his history on a Targaryen dynasty. So without further ado, these are the 10 biggest differences between Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon, Episode 4. And it should go without saying, but spoiler warning because there will be a lot of those in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
We're leaving.
She that steal, you twat!
Number 1. Rhaenyra is never said to visit Storm's End during her courtship progress through the Seven Kingdoms. Our breakdown of the last episode saw us complain about Rhaenyra's courtship period possibly being left out. Well, it looks like our concerns were not completely without cause, because while we did see the Realm's Delight entertain suitors from all over the Seven Kingdoms, the order of things was condensed to a heavy degree. House of the Dragon broke up everything Fire and Blood described into 2 large chunks. We saw the first of those last episode when Lord Jason Lannister tried to woo Rhaenyra into marrying him. This episode gave us the other chunk where Rhaenyra spoke to, or rather at, all the rest of the people named in the books. She was propositioned by Lord Dondarrion, and in attendance were Lords Tully, Frey, and a Blackwood, and a Bracken. And yes, we did end up getting that duel we were so miffed about missing out on in the last episode, though we must admit that what we got was the definition of short, sweet, and to the pointy end. In the end, the princess did end up not picking a single suitor from the 20 or so arranged for her. But the thing is, she did it all at the wrong place. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra's courtship progress sees her go through the Riverlands, then the Westerlands, and then the Reach. House of the Dragon has decided to show us only one of these locations, and it isn't even one she was said to have visited. King of the Narrow Sea opens up in the ancestral castle of House Baratheon, Storm's End, a location where we're supposed to have seen in Game of Thrones more intimately than the one CGI still that we got. This is a peculiar choice, but not one entirely unfounded, as Bormund Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End and Scion of House Baratheon, is actually Rhaenyra's maternal uncle, as Princess Rhaenys Targaryen's mother, Jocelyn, was a Baratheon herself, thereby making Bormund and Rhaenys cousins by the standards of the show anyway. In Fire and Blood, Bormund was Rhaenys' uncle, but House of the Dragon has not been shy of changing a few family relationships here and there to make the story make more sense. It is weird that Ryan and Miguel chose to begin and end the portrayal of Rhaenyra's courtship at Storm's End, but not illogical because the ancient Baratheon fortress is set to be the stage for another conflict down the line with far more severe consequences than Rhaenyra simply rejecting old and young suitors alike. Storm's End will be the proverbial eye of the storm that sparks the Dance of the Dragons, and this will all make sense once Season 1 of House of the Dragon comes to an end, and Season 2 comes out, hopefully next year.
No. I will not revisit this debate. You were always Mother's favorite.
Number 2. Daemon does not return to court for the 5-year anniversary celebration of his brother's marriage. He just does. The shot of Daemon rocking Rhaenyra's ship with Caraxes has been shown in most promotional shots of House of the Dragon, and with good reason. It is an amazing shot, but it also raises the question of why did Daemon return to King's Landing? Because in Fire and Blood, his return to court had some concrete reasons behind it. Daemon returned to court in 111 AC, 5 years into his war for the Stepstones, crowned as the King of the Narrow Sea after conquering all but 2 of those windswept islands. His arrival at King's Landing might have just been a coincidence, but we think it was more of a deliberate choice, because he landed in the middle of the grounds of King's Landing, where a tourney was being held in honor of King Viserys and Queen Alicent's 5th marriage anniversary. In the books, Daemon made a public show of offering up his crown and reconciling with his brother in front of the entire realm, and while the show kept some elements of this offering same, it did cut out the entire feast, tourney, and celebration in favor of a simple scene at the royal court. It works out in favor of House of the Dragon, of course, because showing another tourney would most likely blow the rest of their budget, but it does leave Daemon's return open to interpretation. Though it is most likely that Daemon simply got bored of his kingdom, which is exactly what Fire and Blood claims instigated his return to court, it is also possible that he never even established the kingdom he was proclaimed king of. Daemon explicitly says to Viserys that the stepstones are held by the tides, the crabs, and 2,000 Triarchy corsairs chained to posts as a warning for all. Remember this point, because this will be important later on, but it implies that Daemon simply attacked and ravaged the stepstones without leaving behind any sort of infrastructure to hold it. In Fire and Blood, his return coinciding with the celebration at least made it seem as if Daemon had returned home for his brother, not to seek more glory. But House of the Dragon seeks to focus hard on the emotional beats of the story and pepper in pageantry wherever they can. Arranging another tourney scene after how lavish the production has already been would have taken HBO to the Iron Bank of Bravos, we imagine. So we understand why this happened. Doesn't mean we like it, because we wanted to see Sir Criston Cole unhorse all of Alicent's champions like a mad demon. Guess we're going to have to wait for that one to unravel. Number 3. Daemon's time in King's Landing is radically different from Fire and Blood's description. If you watched King of the Narrow Sea, you would be forgiven for thinking the entire thing got over in one night, because that does seem to be how they have decided to approach the episode's events. Well, 2 to 3 nights at most, but you get our meaning. And the reason why this is so important is that it cuts out an entire subplot from the books, which were meant to show the readers that nothing could ever change the nature of the rogue prince. In Fire and Blood, after Daemon returned to court, he was truly reconciled with his brother. Viserys forgave his brother's misdoings, as he was often wont to do, and embraced him once again. He gave Daemon a seat on the small council once again, though it is never specified which one, and it appeared as though things would be relatively normal now, but Daemon had not changed at all, choosing to take up with his old gold cloaks and resuming his patronage to the brothels of the streets of Silk. Daemon also takes to treating Queen Alicent and her children coldly. Though he would observe all the proper courtesies expected of him, there was no warmth in his relationship with his good sister and his nephews. Archmaester Gildane postulated that this might have been because Alicent's sons had just pushed down the line of succession even further, and we tend to generally agree. This is a recurring theme in his character arc in that no matter how many things Daemon goes through, the core of his chaotic and playful personality never truly changes. House of the Dragon chooses to keep that core personality trait intact, but changes everything else. For instance, Daemon isn't even given the chance to sit on the small council once again, let alone re-establish contact with old friends from the City Watch. The old friend that he does meet gives him a decisive cold shoulder, and Daemon's time in King's Landing could not have been more than 2 days, as opposed to the 6 months that he spent in the capital following his return in Fire and Blood. And that is not all that was cut from the show for pacing purposes.
You've matured yourself these last 4 years, Princess.
Number 4. Daemon's courtship of Rhaenyra is turned into a night of steamy revelry in King's Landing. While Daemon did not care for his good sister or her children, the one person who became the apple of his eye during this period was the princess herself. Fire and Blood describes the 6 months Daemon spent with Rhaenyra after returning from the Stepstones as a courtship in all but name. It is said that the uncle and niece would rarely be found without one another, and Daemon pulled out all the stops to impress her. He would go hawking with her, read poems to her, enthrall her with tales of his war for the Stepstones, and do anything else that the princess seemed to enjoy. Daemon would bring her precious gifts like books, pearls, rare and expensive silks, and even a jade tiara that once belonged to the Empress of Leng. Most of all, Daemon would make mock of Queen Alicent and her children, and given the fact that Rhaenyra and Alicent had begun to properly hate each other by this point in Fire and Blood, it makes sense that this last point would be the one that sealed the deal for him with Rhaenyra, so to speak. Uncle and niece would also fly off to Dragonstone and race back to King's Landing mounted on their dragons. Showing all of this wasn't going to be practical for a show that literally skips at least a year an episode, so they condensed it all into a night of revelry and freedom for Rhaenyra, and boy oh boy did she have a night out. Daemon did get her a gift. That gift was the clothing of a page, so he could sneak Rhaenyra out of the Red Keep and into the city for a night out. The pair walk through the streets of King's Landing, and the princess is enchanted by everything she sees, except a certain play about herself, but we don't need to talk about that in this video. Their night out ends at an establishment in the Street of Silk, and if you have read any of the books written by George R.R. Martin, then you know just how scandalous that phrase is to his in-universe characters. Putting across 6 months worth of emotion in a single night is a feat that is not easy to accomplish, and yet somehow, House of the Dragon managed to pull it off without showing a single jewel exchanging hands. That is just a testament to the writer's skill at adapting the material and the director's ability to portray it all with wordless excitement for the most part, and our hats are off to Claire Kilner for directing such an amazing episode with such nuance and brevity. Number 5. Daemon spurns Rhaenyra, so she goes to Criston Cole, and Harwin Strong is not in contention to become one of her lovers. Yet. Episode 4 of House of the Dragon gives us a look at all 3 of Rhaenyra Targaryen's named lovers from House of the Dragon, and yet the order of events are jumbled into one another to make some sense out of the multiple accounts that Archmaester Gildane pulled from for his history of House of Targaryen. In Fire and Blood, you will find varying accounts regarding the incident involving Rhaenyra and Daemon that nearly caused a scandal at the royal court. One source claims Daemon took Rhaenyra's maidenhead to realize his ambition for sitting the Iron Throne, while another states that he was giving her lessons on how to best seduce Sir Criston Cole, whom she had been smitten with ever since he was named her sworn shield. One of the sources also claims that after Sir Criston rejected the princess's advances, she chanced upon Sir Harwin Strong returning from a night of revels in the city, and the two found themselves abed together by the time the night had ended. While these 3 names seem to be somewhat confirmed to be Rhaenyra's primary lovers in House of the Dragon, the order of events are all over the place. It is true that Daemon took Rhaenyra into that pleasure house with the intent of seducing her, but then just as he was about to soil her, he pulled away. Maybe it's because he realized what he was doing was plain wrong, or maybe it's because Rhaenyra's agency in the moment took him completely out of things. Whatever might be the reason, in House of the Dragon's version of events, Daemon did begin seducing Rhaenyra, but stopped short of actually doing anything, and then spurned her for some common girl. So Rhaenyra, bothered and flushed with ale, returned to the castle and ended up sleeping with her White Knight, confirming for Fire and Blood fans that she did have an intimate relationship with her sworn shield. But because Sir Criston was a member of the Kingsguard, it was much harder to pin the faults of his salacious act on him just because of the reputation that office bestows on a person. Though one of the sources for Fire and Blood most likely accurately predicted how Criston and Rhaenyra's relationship will break down, everything else has been changed. The only interaction Rhaenyra and Sir Harwin have with each other is when she is stopped by him in the alleys of King's Landing, and Daemon was right behind them, so there was no time to, indulge themselves. We quite like what House of the Dragon has done with Rhaenyra's lovers, because it will end up explaining a lot of what will happen in later episodes and seasons. But for now, all you need to know is that this stuff was murky to begin with, and House of the Dragon just dumped a bucket of swamp water into it for good measure, and we love every second of it.
What do you mean?
My father has made some worrying allegations about you.
Number 6. Alicent Hightower does not press her children's claims nearly as instantly as Fire and Blood makes it out to be, yet. House of the Dragon has taken a very interesting approach to the characterization of Alicent Hightower. We're 4 episodes in, and she has managed to make us love her, hate her, and then love her all over again because she truly has no agency over her own life, and that is extremely relatable for a lot of us. Perhaps it is for that reason that she does not hector Viserys with the matter of the succession, yet, but according to Fire and Blood, the Queen should be far more insistent for Aegon's succession already, not spending time feeling lonely and conflicted about her own feelings. By the time 116 AC had come around, which is where the show roughly was in episode 4, king and court knew the relationship between the princess and the queen was one that only projected unity. After giving birth to 4 children, 3 of them male, Archmaester Gildane says that Alicent's insistence that Aegon replacing Rhaenyra as heir had even drawn a ridiculing remark from King Viserys, who said of her suggestion to marry Rhaenyra to Aegon that she simply wanted to see her blood on the Iron Throne. All the accounts that he compiled from his sources clearly state that the queen was one of her son's foremost and most vocal supporters, demanding loudly and frequently that Aegon be named the heir. Having had this knowledge, it was fascinating to us that House of the Dragon has decided to not have her talk about her own son's rights even 3 years into his lifetime, because House of the Dragon has shown Rhaenyra and Alicent as having more of a sisterly relationship, therefore being closer than their fire and blood counterparts. The story becomes a much more complex tale of duty, ambition, and ultimately betrayal. Episode 4 made it a point to show us that even though Alicent had become queen, she enjoyed none of it. She had a son of 3 and a daughter of 1. She was the queen of all 7 kingdoms, and her every whim was looked after, and yet she was bound by duty to her husband and her father. She married Viserys at her father's directive, and serves her husband at his pleasure. She clearly longs to return to her days as a courtier and Rhaenyra's friend, which was also highlighted in episode 4, but she has no idea how deeply hurtful everything she has already done has been for both parties involved. Alicent is a far more sympathetic character coming out of episode 4 than she was going in, at least for us. And the fact that she hasn't started spouting off Aegon's name as the Conqueror Babe like her uncle does not line up with what Gildane says in his tome, but we think that will not be the case for too long. Number 7. No one walks in on Rhaenyra. She is informed on by Mysaria on Otto Hightower's command. One of the biggest changes in House of the Dragon is one that surprisingly cuts out drama in a series that is supposed to be all about that scandal life. In Fire and Blood, the scandal perpetrated by Rhaenyra and Daemon is discovered in appropriately salacious fashion. Archmaester Gildane took into consideration 2 separate testimonies of the events that unfolded that night. The first was by Septon Eustace, who claimed that the princess and her uncle had been found in bed together by Sir Aric Cargill of the Kingsguard. The second was by a court fool Mushroom, who claimed he walked in on Rhaenyra and Criston Cole after allegedly taking part in Daemon's lessons for the princess that were meant to teach her the womanly arts. Gildane puts more stock in Eustace's testimony as the general rule, given how frequently Mushroom's testimony favored stories, gossip, and himself, but both of them agreed on the fact that someone caught the princess in bed with someone else. This is a far cry from what happened in House of the Dragon, where the discovery was made in a far more spider-like fashion, though this time it was a white worm doing the whispering. After Daemon abandons Rhaenyra at the brothel, you can see a little boy make his way off of the Street of Silk. That same boy is later seen meeting with Otto Hightower and informing on Daemon and Rhaenyra's dalliance, and is announced as an informer for the White Worm. Fire and Blood readers will know that this is none other than Mysaria, Daemon's lover, who is also known as Misery, the White Worm, to the residents of King's Landing. House of the Dragon also hints at the fact that she has been informing on Daemon for Otto for a while, and it is quite possible that it was Mysaria who tipped off the hand of the king regarding Daemon's heir for a day speech. This means that she is not exactly the friend Daemon has been thinking she is, but more importantly, it also sets her up for the biggest role of her life, which you will most likely see come to fruition in Season 2 of House of the Dragon. But the one thing that we cannot deny you is letting you know that Rhaenyra's risky night out could have ended a lot worse if the showrunners had decided to stick to the source material for this one. If anything, we're glad she was being spied on and not walked in on, because we're rooting for her after all. Number 8. Balon the Brave's final days have been changed in House of the Dragon. One of the highlights of episode 4, for better or worse, was Paddy Considine's performance as King Viserys Targaryen. The first 3 episodes of House of the Dragon has made it a point to show you how indecisive and indulgent Viserys is as king, taking his sweet time to make important decisions and more given to fawning over things he loves than facing the things that he hates. Well, episode 4 pushed the king of all Westeros to the edge, and he ended up revealing his inner dragon to all of us. While the depiction of his relationship with Alicent was disturbing, to put it plainly, as it should be, because this show is giving us a slice of what true medieval society was like, what is far more interesting is how the show used his past to project the trajectory of his future. King Viserys is the son of King Jaehaerys' second officially named heir, the Prince Balon Targaryen, whom lords and commoners alike called Balon the Brave. As the rider of Vhagar and the foremost warrior of his generation, Balon was seen as the perfect heir. He served his father as Master of Laws for nearly a decade before he was risen to the position of Hand of the King. So as to better prepare him for the kingdom he was meant to rule over one day, Balon held that position for a year before passing away in 101 AC of a burst belly during a hunting trip, an event that sparked the Great Council itself. Fire and Blood tells us that during the hunting trip, the Crown Prince complained of a stitch in his side, which only got worse when he returned to King's Landing and left him bedridden by the end of the day. Within the next 5 days, Balon Targaryen had passed away because of a burst appendix, following which King Jaehaerys appointed Otto Hightower as his hand seemingly out of nowhere. To make this fact even more apparent and to make it clear just how much of a hand Otto had in instigating the dance, House of the Dragon decided to eliminate Balon's 1 year as hand entirely, and made Otto rise in power in far shorter order. When Viserys confronts Otto for his actions against Rhaenyra, which we will get to in a minute, he says that Jaehaerys had called for a hunting trip in celebration of Balon being named Hand. 5 days later, his father passed away, which means that Balon never got to serve as Hand for even a week in HBO's version of events, let alone an entire year. While the 5 days of his suffering are kept intact, the removal of his service as Hand of the King amplifies the doubt being cast on Otto's motivations. How could he, who had been a common courtier up until Balon's death, have become Jaehaerys' hand in such short fashion? We speculated the reasons behind this very appointment in our origin video for Otto Hightower, which you should check out on our channel, but Viserys seemed to imply that Otto manipulated Jaehaerys into naming him Hand, and we tend to agree with him on that. The change made to Balon the Brave story here is minor in a sense, sure, but it makes all the difference when you look at it from a plans within plans perspective. Otto Hightower is one of the smartest men in the Seven Kingdoms, no one denies this, but his methods are so brash and haughty that if Viserys were a less trusting man, he would have been out of a job at least a decade ago. But because he isn't, Otto has managed to sow the seeds of a civil war, which will begin taking root now that he is out of the picture. Or is he?
Leave me. Once.
Number 9. Otto Hightower is not dismissed from his position for hectoring Viserys too much. One of the things that ended up happening earlier than its Fire and Blood counterpart was the firing of Otto Hightower, but the manner in which it was handled was far more intriguing in our opinion. In Fire and Blood, Otto is dismissed in 120 AC for hectoring Viserys too much on the matter of succession, as was the case with Alicent in our early entry. Otto's handling of the matter of succession is quite different in House of the Dragon, but his intent is not, and that lies at the heart of what he does in Episode 4. Otto has Mysaria spy on Daemon and Rhaenyra so he can find something, anything, to get his own grandson on the Iron Throne. We know from Episode 3 that this has been Otto's intention from the beginning of the series, to wed his bloodline into the royal family. He manages to accomplish that in Episode 2, and spends time doting on his grandson and serving him up as a potential match for Rhaenyra in Episode 3. When all of his conventional methods fail, he resorts to espionage, which is what ticks off Viserys properly to the extent of his hand's ambition. In one of his best speeches so far, Viserys bares his fangs for the first time as king, and delivers a veiled enough estimation of Otto's manipulation of his own family. Even when Otto comes to deliver the news of Rhaenyra's dalliance, Viserys treats him with hostility. The firing is a culmination of his own thoughts and Rhaenyra's encouragement, who, like Daemon, recognizes Otto for the vulture he is. Viserys relieves the man who has helped him rule for over 15 years from his duties for putting his own needs above those of the realm, which is a bit of an understatement really, but good on Viserys for realizing it before it was too late. Sadly, this also means that we might just not get the iconic line, "This hand will not hector me," when Viserys does eventually replace him with his Master of Laws, Lord Lionel Strong. One of the most succinct and yet impactful lines from Fire and Blood in our opinion. Number 10. Viserys exiles Daemon from Westeros. He does not send him back to the Vale, and the final difference between the books and the show is the outcome of the War for the Stepstones. While in Fire and Blood, Daemon did leave his kingdom to return to court out of boredom. That did not mean it collapsed in his absence. The Stepstones remained under Targaryen banners even while Daemon was at court fooling around with his niece, and when he was discovered, some of what transpired in the show also happened in the books. Daemon did ask Viserys to marry Rhaenyra to him after causing the confusing scandal that Gildayn found multiple accounts of, but House of the Dragon makes it very clear that this was more of a way to wound his brother than to sully his niece. Daemon did not actually sleep with Rhaenyra, so all the accusations surrounding him taking her maidenhead become unfounded. He also did not teach her how to please a man, instead just seemingly taking her to a brothel to genuinely get intimate with her. Whether that was out of attraction or as a way of getting back at Viserys, we'll let you decide. But after he causes perhaps the biggest royal scandal since Maegor the Cruel took his black brides, Daemon is exiled to the Vale by his brother, which is interesting because that should have happened in episode 2. When Viserys commands Daemon to return the dragon egg and banish Mysaria, he also commands him to return to his wife in Runestone. Daemon obeys all 3 commands, though less than a year after returning to his wife, he is off again to fight his war in the Stepstones. When he is exiled by Viserys a second time in 111 AC, he is told to never return to court, so Daemon flies back to his kingdom and attempts to keep it alive despite not being interested in them. In House of the Dragon, Daemon and Corlys employed a version of scorched earth policy on the Triarchy, in that they left behind a couple thousand of their sailors nailed to posts and devoured by crabs as a warning not to mess with the Seven Kingdoms. So while Daemon technically entered the Red Keep as a king at the beginning of the episode, he was already devoid of his kingdom. This is why it is interesting that he is being sent back to the Vale, because as we know from episode 4, he is fond of neither the place nor his wife. Fans of Fire and Blood will know that the timeline we are in, 115 to 116 AC, lines up with an event in the books where Daemon tries to claim another seed as his base of operations, and eagle-eyed fans might have already spotted this event taking place in the trailer for episode 5. We don't want to spoil the fun any further, but suffice to say that Daemon going to the Vale is going to have a ripple effect of sorts, and we can't wait to see him fight his way out of this one.
Aegon's death. The last of the Valyrian pyromancers hid his song in the steel.
Marvelous verdict. Episode 4 was by far the most intense and interesting episode of House of the Dragon, and that is saying something given the first shot of episode 1 was basically the Great Council of 101 AC. King of the Narrow Sea was as much an exploration of Rhaenyra's loss of innocence as it was about teaching her how a ruler behaves, because throughout the episode, the only true lesson that she learns is that a king or a queen is free to do as he or she wants, and they can take whatever they want because of who they are. You saw this lesson play out in her tryst with Sir Criston, and you can expect it to have a major bearing on everything that happens from this point forward, because really, this is the most important lesson Rhaenyra Targaryen learns and holds on to for the rest of her life. And what is House of the Dragon if not the story of her life? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.